Welcome into our the first tag team OG Pod Live with me and Nove Tocco. We're excited about this. A little bit more engaging, a little bit more organic in real time. Nove and I are over on Patreon every week, giving multiple pieces of content, giving a deep dive into the Detroit mob's history and taking a kind of a guided tour via Nove, who's lived the life of. I talk about people living living a movie. Nove's lived 5, and just there talking about history and keeping everything positive and classy. Kind of stay away from some of the mob tube stuff. Nove, thank you for joining me on this live.
You're welcome, Scott. Good evening.
So this is a little bit different. Everybody gets Nove kind of in real time. You can ask him questions. I'm guessing let's try to keep it kind of like 80% Nove and then 20% kind of pepper in some questions to me as well. Thank you for joining us. We're going to try to do this more often, give people a taste on YouTube, and then hopefully you'll come subscribe to us over on Patreon. I'm going to just start by asking Nove some questions that are popping up on the board. Nove, Peter Jack Corrado, Anthony Giacalone Jr., and Silverio Vitale appear on a November 1993 membership list. So,
okay.
The person's asking, are those accurate? We shouldn't assume people have heard us on Patreon. We've talked about Sal Vitale on Patreon. Wasn't a gangster per se.
No, he wasn't. Anthony Giacalone Jr. was never made, and Peter Jack, I don't remember if he was formally made. That's Paul Corrado's older brother.
Sal Vitale was a trucking executive down in Toledo who grew up with a lot of these guys. Like I'm speaking firsthand. I didn't know, never met Peter Corrado, never met Anthony Giacalone Jr. I knew Sal Vitale because my father, who's an attorney, represented him. I met him a handful of times. Sal Vitale was a guy that wanted to be perceived a certain way, but in reality, he was an associate that leveraged the names of the people that he was basically paying extortion money to.
Yeah, and he was. He had the people that knew him weren't all that fond of him because of his mouth.
Yeah.
Anthony Giacalone Jr. was Tony Giacalone's son. His second son, Anthony, was a nice.
He was a nice guy. He wasn't what his father was.
No, not at all. But
he was a softer, Bobby. For a Sopranos reference, he was a Bobby Bacala. I don't know if Nove gets the reference.
Yeah, I remember that character. Yeah, maybe, but Anthony was. I don't know. I don't know how to put it. I kind of looked out for him his whole life, really, until I went away the last time, and then he got sick and died, passed away. He did a couple of bits. One was for perjury, and I don't remember what the second one, if he ever went away on the second bit.
Well, the one I think he was involved in his dad's case in the late 70s because of the money that was found.
Yeah, and they said, and Anthony was convicted of perjury, lying on the stand for his father, which I can understand. Anybody would lie for your father. Unfortunately, he went away. He was married to my brother, and him were married to sisters, so they were brother-in-laws. I saw Anthony all the time, very, very often, right until the last time I went away. I believe he passed away while I was in prison the last time. He got sick and passed away. He passed away very young.
Someone from a guy named Brian as asking Nove, any dealings with the Chicago outfit?
not so much in business. I knew a couple of those guys. Some of them I'd met in prison, and then afterwards we would talk in regards to the gambling business. Some of the gamblers were going back and forth between Chicago and Detroit, and we were tracking them. Not for anything other than to keep tabs on who they owed, and so that we could rate them correctly. One of them was Don DiSerrano. I knew, and like I said, I did the times I was met some of those people. I was with my uncle, and they were conducting big business between my uncle and them. I accompanied my uncle there, and to tell you the truth, I didn't get involved in specific conversations at that time.
Your uncle.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and let people that are tuning in that, again, assuming that maybe they haven't. Let's just for the sake of making sure everybody's on the same page, we'll assume that people haven't consumed the Patreon stuff that we've done. But Nove's uncle was Tony Zerilli, the mafia prince, longtime underboss, one-time acting boss of the Detroit mob. I spent about a year with him at the end of his life, year and a half. And I know he spoke to me about him and his father's dealings with Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana.
Yeah, well, Tony Accardo and Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was dead by the time I got involved.
No, I know.
Yes.
I know that just from the FBI in Chicago, they released Accardo's daughter's wedding guest list from like 1961 or something, and your grandpa was present.
I'm sure he was.
Someone says at one point Sal Vitalo told the FBI that he was a member. I know that. I think you knew that, right?
Sam Vitale. I knew what? That Sam Vitale was a member?
Vitale that he lied to the FBI saying that.
Absolutely he lied.
Yeah. So let's just get this out of the way to start. Address your cousin, the credibility issues or the legitimacy of your cousin Gunnar Allen Lindbloom.
Don't you have to say my cousin? Yes, he is. Completely illegitimate. Everything he said was a lie. I knew his father, his mother, his father. I mean, not his father, his mother, his grandfather, his grandmother, his mother, his brother, his uncles, his aunt. I knew his grandfather, his grandmother, his step grandmother, great grandmother, and Gunnar Lindbloom's great grandfather was my grandfather's younger brother. He never was related to Vito Tocco or Jack Tocco. He never met Tony Giagalone. He never met Dominic Corrado or Tony Corrado. His father was a produce man that bought my father's route when my dad got married and went to work at the produce terminal at Judson and Zerilli. And Connor's mother, Grace, was named after her grandmother, Grace, and her mother's Connor's grandmother's name, maiden name was Lido. I know the whole family. Him, nobody knows nobody. It's just all completely made up. He probably was a thief, street thug that had to used his name or use these names to make a case for himself to.
Well, I don't think he was using. I don't really think he was using the names when he was on the street.
No, I'm talking about.
I've read through a lot of his files, and there's really no reference to any connection to organized crime.
He didn't even live.
When he was locked up, I think he read my book and learned that there was possibly a con out there to jump outside of prison and say, "Oh, my uncle Jack Tocco, my protege or my mentor Tony Giagalone, guys that were dead and could never push back."
No, and he did. And his grandfather lived in Grosse Pointe Park. but I believe by the time he was born, his grandfather didn't even live in Grosse Pointe Park and moved to St. Clair Shores.
I think he was in elementary school. I think Gunnar was in elementary school when his dad moved, or when his grandfather moved. But nonetheless,
yeah. But his mother and I were in grade school together from grades 1 through 8. I went to a Catholic grade school, St. Ambrose, and his mother was in that grade school. I knew his mother. His mother had some problems with mental illness later in life. He had an uncle that Salvatore that committed suicide, I believe. It was Sal. Uh, he had a step grandmother by the name of Carmela. And
he talks about his uncle Peter a lot. That Peter Paul's son, Peter, Salvatore's brother.
Okay.
I
do remember him, but I don't know him. I remember him being born to the family, but I didn't know him. Like I said, I know Grace and Patrina. The younger sister was my brother's age. Went to school with my brother.
So, I mean, that's all we really need to talk. I mean, there's just not much there. I obviously
there's nothing there.
Was very misguided in giving him the time of day, and I regret it and I own it. I'm just too nice sometimes. But this is all that really I think needs to be said about it.
There's no credibility whatsoever.
He's died down a lot in the last. Yeah, Benny.
Just to get it on the record, Novi, was Gunnar Lindbloom a member of the Detroit Partnership? Yes or no?
No, absolutely not.
I don't think he's ever said he was a member.
Was he an associate of the Detroit Partnership?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I think the question should be: was he ever working on behalf of Tony Giacalone in any capacity?
No, absolutely not.
And is there any way that he collected money before the game tax bust and delivered it to Jack Tocco and Tony Giacalone at the Hazel Park racetrack?
No, absolutely not. Jack Tocco wouldn't go near the Hazel Park racetrack at that time.
Yeah, well, I don't think he was allowed to. I think legally he was not allowed to step foot on the property. All right, so let's we can jump off this. And somebody is asking, and I think this is a fair question, and I hope you're not offended by it, Novi. Someone asking, do you fear for your safety? Do you fear for your life?
I'm cautious about my life. I don't fear for it. But I've always been cautious. I grew up being cautious. My line of work, you have to be cautious. Or in my old line of work, I should say.
I think there needs to be something, and again, this is stuff that we've talked about on Patreon, but we're not going to assume people here have consumed that. There's a narrative about Novi and the cooperation that he gave, and then there's the reality of it. And I was guilty at first of conflating them as well. Novi did not flip and wear a wire. Novi did not testify at any racketeering cases. Novi was convicted along with Jack Tocco and other members of the Detroit family in the 1996 game tax bust, and was facing a stiff prison sentence because it was his second or third strike. He decided to cooperate. His cooperation did not include anything but a debriefing. He did not testify at any trials. He did not wear a wire. And whether or not that matters to the people that are going to just dislike the fact that you cooperated, I don't know. But I just want to make that very clear that there was some nuance and nuance that isn't necessarily most people of Novi's ilk that are known as cooperators and that have done cooperation have done so much more than Novi did. Novi did not get on the stand and testify against anybody at trial, did not wire up. So I want to be clear on what his cooperation was and wasn't.
Well, there was also other factors involved with that. So I had some people of my family and there were other factors that led to doing what I did. I didn't. I did not testify against my street partner. I tried to help him. I believe that there were a lot of mistakes made at during our trial that was done with the acquiescence of some of the people in the trial in regards to me and my partner. And I'm going to leave it at that.
You became the kind of easy, like, we might have been the bosses, but we didn't really know what they were doing, and they were kind of doing everything that you're accusing us of doing, and we didn't know anything about it, was their defense.
I'll leave it at that, Scott. You said what you said.
Yeah. How about we talk about did you ever know a guy, someone's name SZ is bringing a name up that isn't really well known, and I'm wondering if you've recognized the name Mario Faccioni. He was like a professional burglar. He did some business. Did some business with your uncle in the 70s.
It doesn't ring a bell.
He was pulling off scores that were like they weren't your normal everyday scores. He was like robbing like farm equipment and industrial stuff that some of the Detroit guys were moving.
Doesn't ring a bell at all.
Do you know about this is a question that Novan will do this on a Patreon. What I'm about to ask him, I don't need to go there. Maybe in a little bit I will. I want to give other people the opportunity to ask questions. Were you at the Tony Giacaloni's 50th wedding anniversary party in the summer of '92? Were there a lot of those pictures of in black tie that I put in my book and have circulated?
No, I was not there. I do remember it. I remember being was at the Ritz Carlton, I believe. No,
yeah, the Ritz Carlton in Dearborn.
No,
well, he wasn't there. I think what the person's getting at was there was a murder that took place in that hotel that night, and there's a lot of way more questions than answers. Even 33 years later, it happened in the summer of '92 or '93. There was a federal witness that allegedly was involved in some cocaine trafficking activities with members of the Giacaloni crew. And it looks like there was some type of leak in the government protection unit. So it looks like there was some of the people that were supposed to be the good guys were compromised. This guy who got killed, Feuds Ship, was married to the sister of the Michigan Supreme Court Chief Judge. So it's. Do you have any comments on the murder of Feuds Ship?
No, I have no comment. I wasn't there, and I remember the incident, but I don't know any details regarding it.
Does it seem suspicious, I guess, that the government would put him there, B, that, I mean, I guess that's my first question. Is it weird that the government would decide if they were going to put this guy into, is there any way the government didn't know that there was a party that the Giacalonis were hosting there and that they decided to put this guy in the penthouse?
They knew there was a party there. It was public knowledge. It was a black tie affair. People only had people were invited. I remember hearing about it. There was, if I remember correctly, it wasn't a very big gathering. I mean, it wasn't in the thousands.
No, thousands. No, there was probably 150 people there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And Italian weddings at 400 people is a small wedding. But that party was not big at all. You start talking about Tony Giacaloni and his brothers and his sister and their families, and you're talking about 100 people.
It's interesting that Jack Tocco was there. So
Well,
Jack
I'm sure he
Tocco
was.
got an invitation. That was a Freudian slip.
Yeah.
And when the Jackalonis got questioned about this, it's like you couldn't have tailor-made a better alibi. Like they're like, "We think we're going to hurt somebody? Think we're going to kill somebody at the time that we're on the property? Like we're going to be
that doesn't make any sense.
Pointing the finger at ourselves."
That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. None.
And somebody killed the trigger man. The person that killed Fioda's ship was found in the trunk of his car at the airport 3 months later. So do what you want with that. But I feel like there's, and if the government's watching, I don't have a problem saying this. And certain guys in the Detroit FBI have been really good to me. So I'm not speaking directly to any one particular agent. But there is a level of corruption within the Detroit FBI and certain things that have not been investigated the way they've needed to be because of protecting certain people. The story of what happened in the summer of '92 is an example where this witness gets killed while he's in federal protection.
Something don't make sense there,
it's never sat right with me, and frankly, it's affected my relationship with them.
It doesn't make sense to me either, and like I said, I don't have any details.
And then the last thing I'll say, because I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here, and this has nothing really to do with Novi. People outside of Detroit, and even some people in Detroit, probably think that the Jimmy Hoffa murder is the most important unsolved mystery in Michigan history or Detroit history, or some people could say, American crime history. Really, locally, it pales in comparison to getting to the bottom of the Oakland County child killer case, which it has never been solved. It happened in the same couple of years that Jimmy Hoffa was disappeared and presumably murdered. You had a lot of the same FBI agents working on it. And I'm going to leave it at this, and I'm sorry that I'm going off on this little tangent, but the corruption that I just referenced is why that case, the Oakland County child killer case, I'm not talking about Hoffa, but the corruption that I just referenced, which involves, in my opinion, LCN, as well as other spaces of organized crime, African-American organized crime, like with Fioda's ship, he was a black guy, is why the Oakland County child killer case has never been solved. And I know some things firsthand that I can't sleep at night, that turn my stomach, that would make anybody, any God-fearing human being, sick to their stomach to know what people have gotten away with because of corruption in our government. And just for people that don't know, Oakland County child killer, 4 young kids were killed, were raped and killed. They were murdered as part of a kiddie porn exploitation child predator crime ring that had ties into the auto companies, had ties into the both local and federal law enforcement. And the case has never been solved. And I truly believe that this corruption that we're talking about, the reason that Fioda's ship was killed, I know that I'm taking things that aren't connected and they are connected. I'm done. That's my soapbox for the day. How does Detroit induct members? how much emphasis is being the made guy, ceremony, So we've talked about it before, and I'll let Novi expand. Detroit, when Novi was very active, was kind of split between Jack Tocco and Tony Zerilli. Tony Zerilli had his own guys. Novi never took an oath to Jack Tocco. Tony Zerilli was empowered to bring his own guys in. So Novi's induction wasn't really, I guess you would say, standard, but the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office considered Nove Tocco a made member of the Detroit mob. His oath, though, was to his uncle, Tony Zerilli. It wasn't to Jack Tocco. Do you want to explain?
Well, originally, if you're asking me this question, the original thing is that you had to be Sicilian to be inducted, period. 100% Sicilian, both sides. Jack Tocco changed that, and they opened the books at one point. Jack opened the books for a few of the younger guys. I never got involved with any ceremonies. There was supposed to have been a ceremony. I didn't go through one, neither did my street partner, but we refused. So, I can't speak to people that were made in Detroit. Mostly were relatives or very close associates. And it was a much more limited organization than the Detroit, the New York outfits, or Chicago outfits.
Well, Detroit and Chicago just do or did things much differently. Everybody thinks that the way it was going down in New York was just the way that it was and should be, but every family has their own way of doing things. From talking to your uncle about some of the specifics that he told me about making ceremonies, it didn't sound that different. He said that your grandfather, Joe Zerilli, beginning of the meeting, guys would hold hands and say some type of Sicilian mantra. There would be a ceremony that was not exactly like the New York, but kind of Detroit's own version of it. And then at the end, they'd all join hands again. And that's something that I know is common, the holding of, kind of like the daisy chain of holding hands in a circle.
I have a question for Novi. Did your uncle or grandfather ever talk about omerta or like a code of silence, or was it just more implied?
It was always implied. Always implied. The only time I ever heard about the omerta code of silence was in the movies or on television. It was implied, but you got to understand, in the Sicilian heritage, you're almost bred. It's bred into you. Do not trust the authoritarian governments. Sicily is a place that's been oppressed over the centuries, time and time again, and the people were preyed upon. And so it's almost done. I know that there were examples of it given to me time and time again in my childhood. I can remember one story. You want to hear a story? When this Joe Apalachin thing hit the papers, I was up north at Higgins Lake with my grandfather, and the night that it hit, we were sleeping in a hunting lodge, a smaller cottage. It was just me and him. In the middle of the night, my uncle came in with another gentleman who was a member, and my grandfather, they got him up and they said, "Come on, we got to get going. There's shit's hitting the fan in New York." My grandfather came into me and he says, "Listen, I'm leaving. Don't tell anybody I'm gone." Okay. Next day, my grandmother says, "Where's your grandfather?" I said, "I don't know." My dad's there. He says, "Where's your grandfather?" I said, "I don't know." My mother's, "Well, where's your grandfather?" I don't know. What do you want from me? A month later, I see my grandfather. He says, "You could have told Grandma." I says, "Papa, you told me not to say nothing. I ain't saying nothing to anybody." He says, I says, "But Papa, you said don't say anything. That's it. That's the end of it. It ain't coming out." And that's the story. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it was great. I think that's what people want. People want to hear that. somebody's asking, have you ever or I don't know if they're saying have you? Yeah, have you ever dealt with? Did you ever deal with the guys in Philadelphia back in the?
No, I don't remember. Yeah, I met one guy from Philadelphia in Terre Haute, but no, with as far as business, no, I never dealt with him.
Detroit never. I can only really find one crossover in my research between. Well, there was a lot of communication back in the day between Joe Zerilli and Angelo Bruno. I don't know what kind of business was going on, but there was definitely communication. When Jack Tocco became boss, Jimmy Quazzarano and Pete Vitale took him, and I think maybe one of the Corrado brothers took Jack on a kind of a political networking trip to multiple cities in the East Coast. This was in late 79, early 80. The feds followed them on this, where where Jack was introduced to, at that point, Angelo Bruno, John LaRocca in Pittsburgh, I believe John Ridgey in New Jersey, and the guys in New York, introduced as boss. He didn't know them and had to be introduced to them. But other than those two situations, the only crossover that I could find business-wise in like black and white that was in front of me was a situation at Hazel Park Racetrack after your uncle and Jack Tocco sold. And it was when a guy named Pat the Cat Spirito, who was one of Nicky Scarfo's guys who came in after Angelo Bruno, obviously everybody knows that. Anybody that would be in here knows that. Was coming into Hazel Park and doing a little race fixing and kicking up to Detroit guys. But there wasn't a ton of cross section between Philly and Detroit. Would you say that's true, Novi?
Yes, as far as I know. I know that my grandfather knew Angelo Bruno and they had a mutual respect. As far as business, I'm not aware of any that was being done between them.
I know that the last thing I'll say on Philly, and I'll give it over to Novi to see if he has any comment on this. I know that when Joey Merlino came on the scene in the 90s as a 30-year-old guy that was shooting and shoot first, ask questions later, and kind of upending the traditional way things were done in Philadelphia, I know that I don't know if there were wiretaps or just Jack Tocco was telling people, I think, in his inner circle how embarrassed he was for what had become of Angelo Bruno's once pretty stable, respectable regime.
That could very well be.
So Novi, he doesn't know. Novi was not someone who was spending a lot of time with Jack Tocco, despite the same last name. They come from different Tocco bloodlines. Someone asked. Oh, well, before that one, this is kind of a funny question. Were you in Detroit in terms of food? Were you a Lafayette Coney Island or American Coney Island?
Lafayette.
Lafayette. For people that aren't from Detroit, it's like Geno's and Pat's in Philly with cheesesteaks, where they're like right next to each other. Detroit has these Coney Island hot dogs, which is kind of what we're famous for, and the two famous places are right next to each other, and you're either loyal to one or the other. I'm a Lafayette guy too. I grew up going to Lafayette. Benny, bring up that question again. Novi, comment if there was a version of the gasoline tax scam in Detroit. There was a lot. This person's saying there was a lot of Lebanese, Middle Eastern crooked gas station owners doing tax theft. Have you ever heard anything about a gas tax scam?
Yeah, I heard about it. Some of these guys were paying a little street tax, but they were also booking numbers in the same gas station. They were booking the legal number and paying 600 to 1, whereas the state pays 5 to 1. And they were getting taxed, especially if me and my partner ran across them. They got street taxed. And that's really all I have to say. I really don't know the details of the gas station tax evasion in Detroit.
I have a kind of a follow-up question on that, and you might not know anything about this, or you might know a little bit about it. I'm guessing you don't know a ton, but within the Chaldean community in the early '90s, there was unrest. Late '80s, early '90s, where I think there was some type of tacit backing that the Jackallones had given Skinny Eddie Simona and some of Skinny Eddie's guys that were loyal to him, that were trying to, I guess, for lack of a better term, take gambling operations away from what would be considered the Chaldean mafia and bring them underneath the Jackallones' protection. And that there were a number of violent incidents. I'm not saying that you knew about these or asking, but did you know about that there had been kind of a little bit of a situation like that?
Yeah, there was. And I think the opposition, wasn't there a guy named the Hulk?
Yeah, well, that was Norm Dabish.
Did he pass away?
Powerhouse Jim. Yeah, he died young age, too much cocaine and steroids.
Yeah, but wasn't he on the other side of that?
He was on the side of the Chaldean mob.
Yeah.
And I think he was actually one of the guys that was trying to broker like a peace.
Yeah, but he ended up he kind of wanted to get out of Detroit. Didn't he go to Lansing, and then that fell apart?
No, he didn't. No, he died. He went to prison for a couple of years for extortion. His son got convicted on a murder that really had nothing to do with organized crime, but was in the news a lot. The main guy that was at the other side of it was Lua Crowley, the Chaldean godfather, the guy that kind of founded what was known as the Chaldean Mafia. You had a faction of his guys that basically went to Skinny Eddie to go to Tony and Billy to say, come help us break off from them. We'll give you a better deal than you're getting from some of your gambling spots. I think and I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit with Detroit here. There's a prominent defense attorney in Detroit that is who claims that his father was killed in a carjacking, and I don't want to name the guy because I don't want to get into lawsuits or whatever, but this guy's dad was not killed because of a carjacking. He was murdered in this feud.
Yeah, but a lot of that was going on while I was doing my time in prison too.
Yes,
when I got back, there was the remnants of it. It was about over.
Yes.
That's where me and Paul picked up.
Hold on. Okay, someone's someone's asking about Paul Corrado, and let's clear the air on that situation, and just let everybody know what happened there. Just like with Nove, there's a narrative, and there's the actual facts and kind of nuance to what happened. Paulie Corrado never wore a wire. He never wired up for the feds. Paul Corrado was approached while they were in their game tax case, was approached by somebody that was offering to fix the case. Paul thought it was a setup, I'm told, from talking to the feds that have given me their side of it. In reality, it was someone that Billy Giacalone sent at him for whatever reason. But Paul was under the impression that it was a scam. He had his attorney contact the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, and there was some type of communication related to that one particular overture. Nobody wore a wire. Nobody testified against anybody. This was somebody that was trying to protect himself, who then went on to do 12 years in prison and swallowed a sentence that should have been, frankly, given out to the head of the conspiracy, who, by the way, only did a year. Paul did 12. So this idea. Sorry, now Nova, you talk to it.
I'm telling you what happened. Paul was approached, and he came to me. I said, Paul, this smells like a rat. He says, that's what I'm saying. I said, something's not right here. So he says, what do you think? I says, well, talk. Paul had a good attorney. And I said, talk to your attorney. Something ain't right here. Paul did not wear a wire. Paul did not do anything to finger anybody. It was, I don't know if Billy Jagiellone was behind that. I'd never heard that before. But and
I'm
Paul,
pretty sure he was, and then that caused an issue in prison for him and Billy.
Yeah, that caused an issue in prison, in which Paul and Billy Jagiellone had a major problem, because they were in the same prison there for a while. And Paul went on to do the longest term of anybody in the Gamcax thing. He got, I think he was sentenced to 14 years and did 12 or 11 or 12 of it, whatever it comes to. It's 85%. There's no more parole in federal prison. And Paul did every bit of it. So, no, there was no cooperation from Paul. He did say, I think they're trying to set us up. And, it was like, sometimes you feel like everybody's throwing darts at you. We had our co-defendants throwing darts at us. We had the federal government throwing darts at us. And now they're saying, well, shit, if we don't get convicted, they're going to get us on jury tampering. So that's what happened. And Paul had nothing to do with any of that fixing or wiretaps or anything like that. He did not wear a wire. No.
And he did 12 years, man. I mean,
he did the longest.
That's not some small sentence.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the Detroit mob's dealings in the union post Jimmy Hoffa? What was going on? Kind of. I know you were involved with some stuff that was going on in the Oakland County Teamsters with the Baines. That used to be Hoffa guys that left the Southwest Detroit local and went and ran their own one in Oakland County.
What was going on in the unions?
Yeah, just like what kind of control did Detroit have, in the Teamsters or other unions in, let's say, the 80s, as opposed to when Hoffa was?
Well, they had about the same control as long as Fitzsimmons was there. A lot of that was coming out of through Pete Vitale and Jimmy Q and another gentleman that I don't want to name. I don't know if he's still around or not. Pete and Jimmy Q are passed. I knew Mike Bain. I knew his father and his brother. They were in the Teamsters. I was involved in the late 70s and in the hotel restaurant workers. In the 80s, prior to my doing my first bit, I was an independent labor relations negotiator. So I sold myself to the management in dealing with the Teamsters. I never dealt with the Baines in any of those negotiations, but I would talk to them for advice at times, Mike. And
I think the allegation from the government was that Billy Jagiellone had taken over the Oakland County Teamsters through the Baines. That was the allegation. That's what got the Baines thrown out of the union.
Oh, is that what got him thrown out? I don't know really, because like I said, I was away in the late 80s and in the late 90s. So isn't that when they got out of the union?
I think they got tossed in the late 90s.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I was away. I was in prison in the late 90s.
Right.
So I don't know really how that all came down at that time.
I know that I saw your name in some of the stuff related to them.
Well, it could be because, like I said, I used to see Mike pretty regular when he was working for the Teamsters and the hotel and restaurant workers, and I was working for the hotel and restaurant workers. At one time, uh, I was trying to get work with Valenti at the Teamsters Union that handled public employees. I didn't go to work for him. Uh, and Mike was going to bat for me at that time. I haven't seen Mike in 20 or 25 years. I have no idea how long it's been.
What's up, Benny?
Yeah, I'll just help you out with some of the questions. Can Novi comment on Detroit's Canada operation and made members in Windsor, Ontario? Did you have any connections to Canada? Did you have any dealings?
I personally did not, other than the guy in Canada. His name was Onofrio, the same as mine. I personally did not do any business in Canada.
Okay.
But can you speak to the fact that I don't even know what's going on in the 2020s, but back in Nove's grandfather's era, Detroit always had a crew in Canada.
Always had a crew in Canada. I forgot his last name, Onofrio something. Minato. He answered to my grandfather. There was another gentleman over there too.
Joe Catalanati, Nick Cicchini, and Onofrio Minato.
All of them answered to Detroit. They were part of Detroit. My great uncle Pete, had a bakery with his sister in Canada, but it wasn't in Windsor. I believe it was further into Ontario, but I don't remember exactly where in Ontario. And they did have some, and there was always a consideration in Canada. I think if you back into the 20s and to the 30s, you could find connections between guys from Detroit going and doing business in Ontario and Canada. And of course, during Prohibition, there were guys doing business in Canada because they were bringing over Canadian whiskey.
Yep. And there was actually a guy, I want to ask this to Novi. You ever heard of a Mizuraka, Sammy Mizuraka?
Yes.
He was at Jack Tocco's inauguration in '79, and the government at that point said he was in charge of what was going on in Canada.
That could be, because I would have, like I said, after my grandfather, I had no connection to anything in Canada, and that could very well be. But Mizuraka is a name that's out of the Sicilian community in Detroit.
Sammy, they called him the monkey. Sammy the monkey Mizuraka. Hold on, I saw something and I lost.
Jack Tocco had some relatives in Canada too, in Ontario.
Someone's asking about, can you talk about any firsthand stories or memories of the Licavolis? Pete Licavoli, Yanni Licavoli, Dominic Licavoli.
Yanni Licavoli, I don't. I met him when he got out of prison. I never knew him. He went to prison long before I was born. And Pete Licavoli, I knew very well. I knew all his children. I grew up with his third son, Peter. We went to school together. Dominic Licavoli, who was the youngest brother and never had anything to do with any business on the street, was 19 years younger than Pete. And there was another, a sister of Dominic was a couple years older than him, was married to a gentleman by the name of Joe Bomarito. His nickname was Long Joe. Long Joe then left Detroit and went to Las Vegas. And lived in Las Vegas and became a dealer at the Dunes and retired there and passed away there. His son, Teddy, worked in the hotels, and Teddy's my age. I've known him since he was born. And like I said, I knew all of Pete. I used to spend a lot of time as a young man at Pete Licavoli's house. His mother was a great cook, Grace, and what else do you? I know Pete LaCavali told me once in Arizona. I was visiting in Arizona. I was down there. I was living in Arizona. I went down to Tucson. He used to play golf with his son Peter and his son Michael. His son Teddy had passed away young in life, and I saw him, and he said, I made more money in real estate in Arizona since I've been in Arizona than I ever did in the rackets in Detroit, which was probably true. I know there was some beefs between Pete, which was a member of the old crew, the old combination, and Jack Tocco after my grandfather's death in regards to some of the money from the frontier that never got paid to those guys. My uncle Tony felt responsible, but it never got honored. I know Pete was a little bit bitter than that, and at one point he just sent word to Detroit, if you're going to give me any of my money back that you guys owe me, give it to my brother Dominic and leave me alone. And like I said, my Uncle Don was married to my mother's older sister, Dominic LaCavali, the youngest brother, who was, like I said, 19 years younger than Peter, was a gentleman, never did anything illegal. He did do a bit for...
He did a bit for extortion, I think.
Well, I don't know if it was extortion, but he did a bit more that his name was LaCavali or Licavoli.
I thought the pinch was with your uncle, Tony.
I don't remember the details. I know
he did a bit.
And he was ill at the time. He was ill. He had a colostomy, and he did his time in a medical facility, and he wasn't a long sentence. I think it was 2 or 3 years, but it hurt him. It hurt him that he had to pay the price for his brothers. He had a brother that did 35 years. Yanni did 35 years in prison.
Yep.
They let him out on at the end of his life because he had cancer and was dying. I don't think he lasted very longer.
I think he was out for 2-3 years.
Yeah, there was a lot of bad luck in that family. Yanni had been married just prior to his going to prison, and his father and his son died in a car accident visiting him in prison. There was a lot of bad luck in that family. Pete LaCavali for years tried to get his brother out of prison and just never could do it. It was a murder conviction.
He was in state prison too. He wasn't in.
No, he was in Ohio State prison.
Ohio State prison from a murder in Toledo in like 1931, something like
that. Sometime long before I was around. I know that in the Second War here in Detroit, Yanni LaCavali was my Uncle Bill's bodyguard, and Pete was a young man at the time. He was my grandfather's bodyguard in the Second War. They were very active in Prohibition. I guess Pete owned speedboats, or the outfit at that time. The beginning of the outfit owned speedboats, were running.
Yeah, he was controlling the river, the stuff on the river.
Yeah, but like I said, I still talk to his son Michael and his son Peter. Calls me all the time. I've known the whole family all my life. His oldest daughter, Pete LaCavali's oldest daughter, passed away recently, and last time I saw any of them was in a funeral in Las Vegas. I went for Long Joe's daughter died. Joe Bomarito died in Las Vegas, and I was at the funeral.
Someone's asking about the segueing over to another group of Bomaritos. And again, some of this we've talked about on Patreon, but this is to promote people to come over to Patreon. So I never want to assume that people have already heard you talk about this. So I apologize if we're asking you to repeat yourself, but it's just a different audience. Frank Bomarito and his son Carlo, thoughts?
I did not know his son Carlo. I met Frank a few times. He had a place on Gratiot, and his thoughts.
Colorful character.
Colorful. Had a lot of friends with the bikers. At one point, didn't Billy Jagaloni put him into a produce stand in Utica on Van Dyke He was in a produce stand.
He was
there.
Billy Jack. I don't want to put words in Nove's mouth. He was Billy Jack's guy. And that's really all that mattered in that world. Like, he wasn't somebody that I think everybody loved. They just knew that was Billy Jack's guy, and he was a serious individual, even though he was a little bit colorful.
Right. Yeah. But I can remember guys saying to Billy, you know, what are you doing with this guy? He says, yeah, I understand what he is, but he's my guy. And that's what it was. And I didn't do much with Frank. He was not my type of person. I do remember that one of the first times I met him, he said, what the hell kind of name is Novi? I said, what business is yours? It's my grandfather's name. And if you don't like it, go fuck yourself. And that was, and he never rubbed me the right way.
I think people assumed because his name was Bomarito and he might have had some distant, cousins that were the Bomaritos that everybody knows about. But he was a stick-up kid that didn't really come from a pedigree that Billy Giacalone met because of a job that he had pulled. And Billy Jack brought him close, but he wasn't a guy that grew up, as a royal. He was very rough around the edges, and he was. When I got to know him, people that don't know Detroit, 8 Mile in Gratiot is like, it's hard to explain if you've never been there. It's like Dante's Inferno. I mean, it's this weird mix of lower income whites, lower income black gangbangers, bikers, tweakers, hipsters. And it's just this very weird place that only someone like Frank could thrive in.
You're right. That's true. Down the street on Gratiot. Didn't he sell like
carburetors
and the
catalytic converters?
Catalytic converters. That's what I was
stole them, and then he sold. Yeah,
stole them and then sold them. Yeah.
We'd have this. He had this crew of, like, I'm telling you, like, at least at the end of his life, he had this crew of misfits. These like teenage, young 20s, all tattooed. That would be stealing catalytic converters all around the city for him. Last thing about them, and I don't think Nove knows. Nove wasn't here when this happened, but Carlo Bomarito, according to the government, was made into the family. And Carlo Bomarito died of an overdose in 2007. There's a lot of people that think Billy Giacalone, Jack Tocco, and Frank Bomarito hot dosed him. You think that's possible?
Do I think it's possible? Is that what you're asking, Scott?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a method of operation at one point.
I'll just tell you. I'll just leave it at this. I'll tell an anecdote from that. It didn't really resonate for me at the time, but in the years since, it makes more sense to me. The first time I met Frank Bomarito was shortly after his son died. And one of the first things I said to Frank Bomarito was, I'm sorry to hear about Carlo. And his response to me, again, having never met me before, was, that motherfucker got what he deserved. And I took it as him saying he was a drug addict and he got caught overdosing. But now I believe that he killed his own son. But
when it comes to Frank Bomarito, I'm not saying nothing's too outlandish.
Benny, think was Tony Jack's son, was Joey Jack a main member? You don't have to talk about it if you don't want. He's alive right now.
No.
Novi says no. The government says yes. He's definitely a very successful businessman. In my personal reporting, I don't have anything current on him. He was a guy that made a lot of legitimate money in selling a piece of property. He's worth tens of millions of dollars legitimately. Has a horse ranch in Texas, and I can tell you that he, in terms of personality traits that he inherited from his father, he's someone that is very fashion conscious, always dressed to the nines and looking like $1 million. Did people strive to be captains, or was that dissuaded? Could ambition get you killed?
Ambition in any place can get you killed if it's done in the wrong way. No, it didn't get you killed as long as you were following the rules. You know, a perfect example of that was Tony Jagiellone as a young man. He was ambitious. A good friend of his told me a story about Tony when they were young men and in the old neighborhoods, and saw my great uncle Bill drive by in a nice car and dressed in a nice suit. And Tony Jagiellone says, "That's what I'm going to be one day." That's ambition, but he did it the right way. Some of the other guys that were ambitious but did it wrong, one was Pete Covataya. Very into it. There were some other guys that were ambitious and some bad luck. You know, a couple of long prison sentences can end your career because you become out of touch. You get old. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what led up to situations, so you're not completely informed on how to react properly. So ambition, no, in and of itself, if it's channeled in the right direction, it does not get you killed.
Someone hierarchical changes that happen in the family once the how aware of you were you of when game tax happened and a lot of guys had to go to jail? Who was filling those spots?
Well, eventually, if you remember, if you ever heard all the tapes of my case, there's a conversation between me and Paul Corrado. What's going to happen when Jack Tocco's not around?
Yeah.
And we were talking about it, and I said the only logical person that would want to take it would be Jackie. Jackie was a moneymaker and an intelligent young man. Some of the others did not, were not as astute.
And Jackie was ambitious.
And Jackie was ambitious, correct. There's another example of ambition doesn't get you killed. And Jack knew how to make a dollar. Then you had some of the old timers like Tony Lopp that didn't want to, probably didn't want to be up on top, but was in an advisory position because he was a lot older than Jack. Vince Maley was getting too old. And Jack was still at the helm until his death because he was only gone for such a short period of time. It didn't matter.
Would you say it's accurate that when he went away, that his brother, who we should say Tony Tocco Ton, he was the only one who beat the game tax case, so he didn't go away. The government later on claimed that he'd become acting boss for.
Acting boss in so much as that he was probably just acting according to the wishes of his older brother Jack. Jack was the brighter brother, and Tony didn't have that administrative ability. What happened here?
Got it. I think Scott froze out, so he'll come back. But we could keep asking some questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's see. Talking about the Vegas times, was there a point, Novi, where you realized that you were part of family royalty or Detroit mob family royalty?
Well, that was good before I went to Vegas. I realized that. I knew that let me see. Once when I got to be a teenager, I knew there was a lot of interest. There was some stories that broke when I was in high school on the national news about Detroit uh, ruling hierarchy and the mafia, and they had pictures of my grandfather's house, my Uncle Bill's house, my Uncle Pete's house. So yes, I knew I was born to a special family. I knew that it's a funny story. And when I was a kid in the neighborhood of my grandfather's house, they were always working on the phone line. Well, in those days, to tap a phone line, they had to go up on top of a phone pole and put a tent up. Well, me and my brother would go around knocking the ladders down and telling the guys in the top of the tent, who were probably FBI, I don't know what they were, hey, go screw yourself, climb down, you assholes. We knew they were tapping there was always a wiretap around my grandfather's house, or Uncle Bill's house, or Uncle Pete's house. I can remember a time where I was with my grandfather. We went to Miami Beach, and I think he was picking me up at the airport. I was about 12 or 13, and the FBI stopped him and said he's not wanted in Miami Beach. And he says, it's still America. Leave me alone. So I knew that there was pressure, and there were a lot of instances. There was one. It was a news crew, and I think it was for the Huntley-Brinkley report, and they were filming the houses off of Middlesex of Uncle Bill, my grandfather, and Uncle Pete. And it was a summer day, and kids were playing. My cousins and the younger kids were playing on the front lawn, and my grandmother came out and said, she yelled, "What are you people doing? There's children here." What they quoted her on television as saying is, "We're going to kill your children." They quoted my grandmother saying that. That's what they said on Huntley-Brinkley. So I knew these people were not honest people. And I remember the next day we went to school, Pete Tocco, me, there were a couple other guys, Pete LaCavali, and the school. We were at Austin Catholic Preparatory School. I was in ninth grade, I think. And the principal brought us in the next morning and said, "Listen, why don't you guys go home? We know tension's going to be high, and we don't need you guys starting any aggravation, getting any aggravation." So that was something that was building. And by the time I was in college and went to my uncle, I knew exactly what we were dealing with. And nobody ever explained to me the hierarchy or any of that, but I knew that I wouldn't have gone with my uncle had my grandfather. In fact, when my uncle told me, "You're coming with me," we were sitting at a Sunday dinner, and the women had gotten up and were clearing the table, and the men were sitting there. My father was there, and my grandfather acquiesced to it. My father acquiesced to it. Not acquiesced, but they said, "Okay," and you go with your uncle and you learn. And that was when the statement was made, he's going to learn about the fine Italian hand.
Gotcha.
Someone's complimenting you and saying that after looking at your mugshot from back in the day, they wouldn't expect you to look as good as you look right now. You look great. You look like you're in great shape.
Thank you. No, thank you. You know what? Somebody once said, "You know what being in a can means? It means you're in a can, so you get preserved better."
Yeah.
Anyway,
we'll go for another 10, 15 minutes. Are you okay, Nove, for doing that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
And then we'll try to maybe do some more of these live broadcasts. This has been fun. Someone's asking, did you hear any stories from your family and your grandfather about Apalachin? We know that he was there. He was not arrested, but we know he was there.
Yes, I heard about him. That happened when I was quite young.
He would have been like 10.
Yeah, I would have been about 10. I know that there was some animosity about the reason it was called. I think that Vito Genovese asked for that meeting.
We had killed. I think it was on the heels of killing Albert Anastasia, I'm pretty sure. in the barbershop, the famous murder.
Yeah, okay. And it was that, and then drugs were brought up. He was very much in favor of drugs. Some of the old timers didn't like that, at least not publicly. In the 50s, some of the New York families were already dealing heavily in drugs, heroin at the time. My grandfather never agreed to that. In fact, I know that he threatened a few people who later became more prominent, and he said, quit, leave town, or get killed. That's your option. And one of them has been a name that's been mentioned many times in our conversations. Yeah, he was at Appalachia. It is my understanding that Tony Corrado carried him across the stream because he was already 60 years old. My grandfather was not a great swimmer, and them guys were dressed in nice suits and stuff. Tony Corrado was a very strong young man, a great swimmer, and he took him across that stream. I'm trying to remember who was with him. There was one other person.
The Fed, according to the stuff that I've read from the feds, they say that your grandfather was accompanied by Tony Giacalone, Tony Corrado, and Mike Polizzi. They know that Polizzi, well, they suspect Polizzi was there because they found some pieces of paper on the ground. One of the pieces of paper had Polizzi's number on it. Another of the pieces of paper on the grounds had his fingerprints on it, and I believe they had Tony Giacalone's fingerprints on a car rental slip that they rented for your grandfather in Binghamton, New York, the day or two before.
That could be. I thought there was one more along with Tony the Bull. Tony the Bull was Tony Corrado. I didn't call him the Bull. We called him PC. Was a young, strong man, was probably watching my grandfather's back. That would have been his nephew. And Mike Polizzi, like I say, his father and my grandfather were very close. Mike Polizzi's father, Angelo, was still alive, but I believe he was ill. I'm not sure if he was ill that early in the 50s, but I know he was in the early 60s. He was ill and passed away. And that could very well be. I thought there was one more. There could have been two, but I did hear stories of the Appalachia. I know that my grandfather never had a great opinion of Vito Genovese. And I know that originally the connection to the Barbera family came some years earlier through my uncle Pete Corrado, where they got to know the Barberas and developed a relationship. And
I mean, that's the direct tie from Detroit to Apalachin, was the fact that it was hosted by the Barbera family, and Joe Jr., the son of the Scranton Godfather, got transferred into the Detroit family because he married Pete Vitale's
oldest daughter, Josephine. I stood up in the wedding. I've got a picture of that wedding if you'd like to see it.
Me and Novi are gonna be together at some point in the near future, and we'll do like a whole show and tell with some photos that I have that I've never
photos
showed.
and some old stuff. And that's the original. There was a connection between Detroit and Buffalo going back into the late 20s. Maybe before that. I can't speak offhand. I do know it was the late 20s. There was a connection. And Buffalo was, and then when you got the war in 31, Buffalo was aligned with the Castellamare people, with New York, some of the New York people, and Detroit. My grandfather's crew, Uncle Bill, Uncle Pete, and all that, they were aligned with the Castellamare people. The man that was killed in the fish market massacre.
Gaspar Milazzo.
Gaspar Milazzo, his son married my first cousin. I knew Gaspar, his son Tony, very well, and his father was Castellamare, and he was very well respected as a peacemaker. And he ended up getting killed in that thing. And I know that that solidified that Detroit was going to stay with the Castellamare. My grandfather also has some very close associates that you've never heard the names, and I'm not going to give it out. That were from Castellamare to Golfo and very serious men.
Someone's asking, maybe this would be either our last or second to last question. And we've talked about this on Patreon. So some of the stuff that people are asking for, you're going to be able to get that and a lot more over on our Patreon. And there are some people that put up, one piece of content a week. There's a certain former mafia boss that's charging $30 a month for one piece of content a week. We're putting, we got sometimes four pieces of content a week, nice chunks of stuff that we're doing with Nove, and we're just going to keep building it with other OG personalities that we've been talking about. Nove, can you talk a little bit about, again, this is stuff that we've talked about on Patreon, but let's give it to the YouTube audience. Talk about in the 60s, going with your uncle to Las Vegas and kind of being shown the town and shown how things work there. And
I was very young. I was in college. Like I said, it was okayed by my grandfather. My father, of course, had to agree to it. And we started out going to Louisiana. My grandfather had wanted my uncle to deliver some messages to Carlos Marcelo and his partner. And then we went from there to Phoenix. We saw there was an attorney there whose father was a friend of my grandfather's. And we talked to him. He was going to do some work in regards to the frontier. From there, we flew to Los Angeles, and from Los Angeles, we flew into Vegas. And we were there for quite a while. We were there at a suite in the DI for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And there were meetings going on just about every day, maybe not on Sunday so much. Guys would play golf or do what they had to do. This was in January, February, so the weather was very pleasant in Las Vegas. You get that. You know what that desert pleasantness is in February.
Yeah.
There were guys from California, St. Louis, Cleveland. Not California. Las Vegas, Cleveland, Kansas City. Might have been some people from New York. Some of the names forget, and I was there were meetings in the suites, and like I said, I was there when the deal was cut for the frontier, and they were making some arrangements. There were both some Jewish people from Las Vegas, plus some Jewish people that ended up on the paperwork for the frontier. And at that time, they owned the Silver Slipper. And I don't know, what else do you want me to bring up about it?
We can, go, like I said, go to our Patreon. We've talked about it a lot more. We're going to do more of these where we can talk about this kind of stuff. Just 2 more things that I'm going to throw at you, Nove, shorter, lighter fare. And then Ben can throw something at you too, and then we'll finish up. Someone's asking best place to eat. I'm guessing they're talking about Italian food. Best Italian food in Detroit. If somebody was coming into town, where would you tell them to go?
Where would I tell them to go? On the east side, I like Andiamo's. I tell them to go to Andiamo's. There's a few locations. The one that I would go to is one on 14 Mile, the original. There's also Luciano's on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
Luciano's his wife, Luciano passed away, but his wife is now the chef. She's a wonderful chef. She really
It's
knows how to
great. It's my favorite. It's my favorite place.
and she's really a wonderful. And Luciano was from Tettesini, and their food is very much like what my grandmother cooked. Andiamo's is a little their original head chef was from northern Italy, a very
Aldo.
good chef.
It was Aldo,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and he had a place on the east side when I was young called Aldo's. So his is a little more northern Italian, even though the owners of Andiamo's are Sicilian. But Luciano's, you get some, and then there's some, for Italian food. Now, I don't get to the West Side very much. The only time I go to the West Side anymore is if I want to go to Joe Muir's on Woodward Avenue. I go there for fish.
That's barely West Side. That's like, right
Yeah,
where the
that's just
east
on the
becomes west.
fringe. So I don't go very often.
I'll tell people the two best places to go on the West Side are La Strada, which is actually Tony Lopp, Chicago Tony in Birmingham, and Cafe Cortina, which has been there for a long time. It's in Farmington, not even Farmington Hills. You would never expect there to be a great Italian restaurant there, but it's expensive, but it's great. Some of the best Italian food you'll have. Never been to Giovanni's. People tell me I need to check that out.
And nobody asked me, but my favorite spot is Antonio's in Sterling Heights off of 14.
Yeah, it's right.
Love that spot. Yeah.
It's right. It's
Sterling
about
Heights, Antonio.
It's a mile or two from Andiamo.
Okay.
I
gotta go there now.
It's a small spot, but
Yeah.
every time my dad has a birthday or somebody at the family has a birthday, we go there. We love it. And to add any credibility, I am Sicilian on my father's side, so
The name Augusta, I knew that.
Yeah.
I was going to Antonio's, the one that Ben's talking about. I was taking dates there in high school, thinking I was all slick, finding this small little hidden gem. And it's not just for people that might be interested in this. This is not the Antonio's, which there's a chain in Detroit called Antonio's, which is a West Side chain, which is good. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from it, but it's not this Antonio's that Ben's talking about is a one-off. It's not a chain, and it's on 14 miles. So is Andiamo. I think Antonio's is like 14 in DeQuinder and Ryan-ish, and then Andiamo is 14 in Van Dyke.
Yeah, it's a nice, quaint spot with a bar.
Quiet.
Very nice.
Yeah, it sounds like my kind of place. I've got to try it.
Oh yeah, love it. Love it.
I think this is my boy Chris Casprozo. I'm not sure, but he's got a good question. Let's end with this. He's asking kind of what was your opinion or the opinion of people that you were around when you would see on the TV or in film interpretations of Detroit, like the Hoffa movie back in the 90s had Armand Assante playing a version of Tony Giacalone. There was a famous scene. I don't know if nobody knows this. There was a famous scene in the movie True Romance where Christopher Walken plays a Detroit Mafia Don. Do you remember having kind of, as you were living it, seeing things and kind of...
Yeah, I remember seeing things in movies. Most of the time we laughed. The character in The Godfather that gets up and says, in my town...
Right, it's supposed to be your grandfather.
Yeah, well, my grandfather would never have allowed drugs, but he physically resembled my grandfather more than anybody else ever did. I mean, physically, my grandfather was built like that man.
Mario Puzo wrote the role based on your grandfather.
Yeah, but most of those depictions didn't completely. Mario Puzo did not understand the Sicilian tradition, because the names of the children wouldn't have been what they were in the movie.
Right.
We were very strict about how you named your children, and most of those, I don't know, Christopher Walken. I don't remember that.
If you ever have time,
it's not really a mob movie. It's more
I know,
like
but
an
was
action
that about the guy was robbing somebody or something, and Christopher Walken steps in? I thought that was a bad character.
The backstory was that there was this Detroit kind of loner who he watched movies and always kind of dreamed of being a badass, but wasn't a badass.
Yeah,
and then something kind of like changes in him, and he stumbles upon a stolen money and drugs.
Yeah.
And his dad was played by Dennis Hopper, is kind of left in Detroit while the Christian Slater character goes to LA, and Christopher Walken plays the Detroit Mafia Don who goes and sees Dennis Hopper.
I remember that movie now. Yeah,
and gives him a classic back and forth.
I never met a mafia boss and actor who looked like that. I don't know. Maybe somebody on the East Coast might have done that.
If you're ever bored, Novi, you could go on YouTube and type in the Sicilian scene, True Romance.
True Romance, and, it's a classic.
Yeah. It's a classic
scene. And Dennis, I'm not giving anything away because I'm sure people. Christopher Walken kills Dennis Hopper afterwards and says, "I haven't killed anyone since 1984."
No, first of all, people don't brag like that.
Right.
Second of all, some of these people are displayed in the movies as so serious, but these men were not that serious amongst each other. Like I said earlier, you don't live this life because you're always so serious and straight-laced, and you joke around, you laugh, you have a good time.
If you didn't have a sense of humor.
Yeah, and there was one movie I remember. What was it? It's about the Irishman in Cleveland.
Yeah, Kill the Irishman.
Yeah, Kill the Irishman with Christopher Walken was in it. He played a Jewish bookmaker.
Played Shandor Burns, yeah.
Yeah, and then that was all filmed at the Roma Cafe. A lot of it was filmed at the Roma Cafe.
Filmed at Eastern Market. I was there when I was. Yep.
Yeah, how many times I've been to the Roma Cafe in my life? 1,000 times.
Oldest Italian restaurant in Detroit. I wouldn't tell people necessarily if you're looking for great Italian food to go there, because frankly, the Italian food is not great. It's more of like you're going there for history. You're going there because of historic purposes.
Yeah.
And it's a place that Frank Sinatra liked to go to.
Yeah.
But
that was a little more realistic. Other than that movie, you had people from New York saying their influence in Cleveland. Cleveland would have been much more influenced by Detroit than New York. Jack White.
And all those guys that were all those guys that were in the middle of that were former Detroiters. Jack Licavoli was Pete and Yanni's first cousin. And Leo Mosheri was a Detroiter.
Yeah. Leo Mosheri was originally from Detroit.
Right.
Black Bill's mother was a Mosheri. There's Mosheris throughout the Sicilian community here. The best builders in the Southeast Michigan were Mosheris. They had nothing to do with any gangsters. They're nice people. I live in a place that was built by the Mosheris. So,
That Mario Puzo wrote the character that we're referencing. If you remember the movie, that the commission meets and Vito Corleone is there, and a guy stands up and gives a speech about that they shouldn't sell drugs. They should let the blacks sell drugs themselves, and whatever. And that character was named Joe, or the character was named Joe Zalucci, and it was based on Joe Zarilli. Mario Puzo did research and named a lot of the characters on his commission based on real life.
Physically, that man resembled my grandfather.
Yeah. Was this in Godfather 1 or 2?
In the first one.
First one. Okay.
Yeah. Now
I think it was after Sonny. I think it was after Sonny gets killed.
You got movies like The Goodfellas and Goodfellas with them guys. They're sitting around playing cards, and the one guy loses his temper and shoots the kid that the guy that's delivering them drinks, and then they're arguing about what they're going to do with the body. You did something like that in Detroit, you get your fucking head cut off, and you would have been hung by your balls. You don't do shit. You don't kill somebody because he tells you to go screw yourself. That shit didn't happen. You know, if that happened, you were in big trouble. You better get the hell out of town. There were some of the old rules you didn't follow.
So you're saying that Gunner never went to the Spaghetti Palace and threatened your uncle, like he's told in stories before, that he went into your uncle's office and told him, I got guns too. You have guns, I have guns too. That never happened?
You know,
we'll end on this.
Tony Zarelli may have been an old man. He wasn't physically incapable, but he had a son that stands 6'2" and would have taken his head off and used it as a football in the parking lot. I was like that shit.
That's a good way to end. Please, everybody, like, share, and subscribe. Come over to Patreon, where Nove and I are on multiple times a week, and we're starting to build a stable of OG personalities where we're going to be giving you everything you have in the so-called MobTube space without any of the toxicity, without any of the negativity, without any of the mudslinging. We're going to have exclusive content like with Nove and other members, former members from around the country, that you're only going to get on our Patreon, and it's going to be a no mudslinging zone. It's all going to be positive and friendly, and we're going to do it the right way. So come check us out on Patreon. Nove, thank you for joining us for an hour and a half. We went a long time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Benny, thank you so much. He's our MVP. And keep checking back at Original Gangsters. Like, share, and subscribe. Uncovering the underworld, one city, one region, one country at a time. I'm out. We're out.